When doctors give up, God performs the miracle science can't explain. Have you ever wondered why miracles happen when everything seems lost? Why God stays silent until the very last moment? And then suddenly, what science couldn't explain becomes reality. Today, you will discover the divine mystery behind the moments when doctors give up and heaven begins to move. Because maybe what you're living right now isn't the end of your story. It's the moment God starts writing a new one. I've seen this happen before, not just in others, but in my own life. I've walked through the silence, I've asked heaven for answers, and I've witnessed the impossible unfold right before my eyes. Every testimony you'll hear here isn't just about faith winning over medicine. It's about God proving that no limit can stop His power. Stay until the end, because what I'm about to reveal may completely change the way you understand divine silence, and make you realize that your miracle might already be on its way. The silence in the room. The silence in the room has a sound of its own. It isn't the kind of silence that brings peace, but the one that weighs on the soul. Thick, heavy, almost alive. It follows the last words spoken by a doctor when there's nothing left to try. It lingers in the air between one heartbeat and the next, between hope and acceptance. Machines continue to hum, lights flicker softly, and everyone present knows something sacred is happening, something that logic can't measure. In that moment, faith is not a choice. It's the only thing left breathing. Every person who has faced that silence carries it inside forever. It's the silence of a parent holding a child's hand, of a spouse refusing to leave the bedside, of friends whispering prayers while pretending not to cry. It's the sound of humanity colliding with its limits. The silence doesn't ask for explanations, it demands surrender. And in that surrender, something begins to stir, not around us but within us. The human spirit, when stripped of control, becomes the most honest vessel of faith. Inside that silence, time behaves differently. Minutes stretch into eternities, and seconds feel like the distance between life and death. People who once relied on reason begin to speak words they never thought they would. They call on heaven, not out of habit, but out of necessity. Because deep down, every soul knows that there are moments when no earthly hand can reach the wound, no knowledge can rewrite the outcome, and no voice but God's can cross the gap between despair and peace. I've been in rooms like that, places where the air feels holy because it's filled with both fear and faith, where tears fall quietly, but each one carries the weight of an entire prayer. I've seen doctors step back, not in defeat, but in reverence, acknowledging that something greater than medicine has taken the lead. Because the truth is, science can prolong life, but only God can restore purpose. And sometimes what seems like the end is not a failure of medicine. It's an invitation for heaven to act. The silence in the room teaches us something profound, that God doesn't need noise to perform miracles. He often works in whispers, in moments when the world has run out of words. When we stop demanding answers, He begins to reveal presence. When the body grows weak, the soul grows sensitive enough to feel what the eyes cannot see. It's not about giving up, it's about giving in, allowing divine hands to do what human hands cannot. Maybe right now, you are in your own silent room. It may not have hospital walls or machines, but it holds the same tension. A relationship that feels lost, a dream that's fading, a life that no longer makes sense. And perhaps you too have heard that same phrase, spoken in different ways. There's nothing more we can do. But I need you to understand something. When those words are spoken, they don't mark the end. They signal the threshold of a miracle. Because God often begins His work at the exact point where everyone else stops. That silence isn't proof of God's absence. It's evidence of His preparation. The space between what was and what will be is where faith learns to breathe on its own. Don't mistake the stillness for emptiness. It's where heaven is gathering strength, where angels move quietly, where the unseen begins to take shape. In that still air, prayers rise like smoke, unseen but powerful, forming bridges between pain and purpose. The silence in the room has broken more hearts than words ever could, but it has also birthed more miracles than anyone could count. Because before every divine intervention, there is always a moment when everything seems lost. It's the pause before resurrection, the darkness before dawn, the breath before life returns. That is the sacred rhythm of God. He lets the noise fade so his voice can be heard. And when it speaks, it doesn't shout, it restores. So if you find yourself surrounded by silence, don't be afraid. The same silence that feels unbearable may be the sound of heaven arranging what you cannot see. God is not late, he is precise. He is not absent, he is preparing. What feels like nothing happening is often everything beginning. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that the silence wasn't your enemy. It was the room where the miracle started to breathe, where human knowledge ends. There comes a point when even the brightest minds and the most advanced machines reach their limit. It's the moment when science stands still and admits, we don't know why. It's not failure, it's honesty. Every doctor, every researcher, every person who has fought to save a life eventually faces that boundary, the edge of human understanding. And in that space, the invisible begins to take shape. Where the mind cannot go, faith steps forward. Where the microscope cannot see, the spirit perceives. We live in a world built on logic and proof, yet there are moments that humble all our progress. A heartbeat that returns after flatline, a tumor that disappears overnight, a body declared lifeless that suddenly breathes again. These are not stories told to replace science, but to remind us that science and faith were never meant to be enemies. They are two languages trying to describe the same mystery, the miracle of life itself. Knowledge explains how things work. Faith reveals why they matter. When knowledge reaches its end, something extraordinary happens. The atmosphere changes. Those who thought they understood everything suddenly feel small, and in that smallness they encounter God. It's not a rejection of knowledge. It's a revelation that knowledge itself points to something greater. Because every answered question opens the door to 1,000 others. The more we learn about the body, the brain, the universe, the more we realize how limited our vision still is. The Creator allows us to explore his masterpiece, but he never lets us replace him as the artist. I've met people who lived through what doctors could only describe as unexplainable. They weren't against medicine, they were grateful for it. But they knew something had happened that no test could measure. One woman told me she felt a warmth cover her body right before her heart began to beat again. Another said she saw peace before she saw light. Each story different, yet all carried the same truth. At the edge of knowledge stands a God who writes beyond the margins of reason. Science gives us tools to heal, but only God gives us the meaning behind healing. A doctor can close a wound, but only the Creator can make that wound become a story of faith. And isn't it strange that the same God who created the laws of nature also chooses sometimes to suspend them? Not to confuse us, but to remind us that he alone governs the laws we study. What we call miracles are not interruptions in the natural order. They are glimpses of its deeper design. Where human knowledge ends, peace begins. Because when we no longer have answers, we are finally ready to receive presence. It's not ignorance, it's surrender. The end of understanding is not the end of truth, it's the beginning of trust. Faith doesn't start when science fails. It begins when we recognize that all understanding, no matter how great, still depends on a wisdom higher than ours. Maybe you've reached that limit in your own life, when every plan, every solution, every effort has fallen short. You've done all you can, and still, nothing seems to move. That's the edge of human knowledge. But don't mistake it for a dead end. It's the doorway where the natural gives way to the supernatural. It's the exact place where God whispers, "Now, let me." The greatest scientists and the deepest believers share something in common. Both stand in awe before the mystery of existence. They look at the same stars, the same heartbeat, the same breath, and admit, there's more here than we can explain. The difference is that faith doesn't stop at awe. It moves toward relationship. It trusts the one behind the mystery. So when you come to that place where your understanding runs dry, don't despair. That's not where the story ends. It's where faith begins to write. The same God who gave us the mind to question also gave us the heart to believe. And when knowledge reaches its end, faith steps in, not to erase reason, but to fulfill it. Because sometimes the most divine revelation comes not through discovery, but through surrender. And it's in that surrender, quiet, honest, and complete, that miracles begin to breathe again. The cry heaven heard. There are moments in life when words fail, when prayers don't sound like prayers anymore, but like raw cries torn from the depths of the soul. It's the sound that escapes when the pain becomes too heavy for speech. No script, no posture, no perfect phrase, just the human heart calling for help. That cry doesn't need translation. Heaven understands it perfectly. It's the purest form of prayer, the one that doesn't ask with elegance but with desperation. And it is often that cry, not the calm, well-structured prayer, that reaches the throne of God first. When someone you love lies motionless, when the doctor shakes their head, when the last option has failed, something deep within you breaks open. It's there, in that breaking, that faith becomes real. Because when strength is gone, all that remains is surrender. And surrender is the language of miracles. The world teaches us to stay in control, to plan, to understand, to fight. But faith often begins where control ends. Sometimes God allows us to reach the edge of ourselves so that we finally let Him in. I've seen people cry out like that. People who had no more words left, only pain. Their cries didn't echo into emptiness. They touched something eternal. One mother knelt beside her dying child and whispered, "Jesus, please just breathe for him." Hours later, the same doctors who told her to prepare for goodbye stood speechless as that little boy took another breath. They called it a medical mystery. She called it mercy. Because heaven doesn't measure sound waves, it measures hearts. The cry heaven hears isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, a tear falling in the dark, a whispered, "God, please don't leave me." Sometimes it's the person who can't even speak, who just closes their eyes and lets the soul groan what the mouth cannot. Scripture calls it groanings too deep for words. That's the sound of a spirit communicating directly with its creator, bypassing language, logic, and fear. And in that unseen connection, something shifts. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but always eternally. Heaven doesn't respond to performance, it responds to authenticity. The power of prayer isn't in its beauty, it's in its honesty. God isn't moved by the perfection of our words, but by the condition of our hearts. When the heart cries out, heaven listens, not with pity, but with purpose. And what begins as desperation often ends as transformation. Because that cry awakens something divine, a response woven not in time, but in eternity. Sometimes the answer to that cry comes in healing. Sometimes it comes in peace. And sometimes it comes in strength to face what seemed impossible. Miracles take many forms. Some you can see, some you can only feel. But every one of them begins the same way, with a cry that refuses to die in silence. Faith doesn't always look victorious. Sometimes it looks like trembling hands and tear-filled eyes still reaching toward heaven. Maybe you've been holding that cry inside, afraid it means weakness. But what if it's not weakness at all? What if it's your breakthrough waiting to be spoken? What if heaven has been waiting, not for your strength, but for your surrender? Because in that raw cry, you're not just speaking to God, you're allowing Him to move. And every time a soul dares to cry out, the impossible begins to shift. There's a moment in every story of faith when the human voice and the divine will meet halfway. That's where miracles are born, not in perfection, but in collision. The cry rises, grace descends, and something eternal happens in the space between. It's the sound of heaven bending low to touch the earth, to touch you. So, if all you can do today is cry, cry with faith. Don't hide it. Don't silence it, because your tears carry more power than you realize. Heaven isn't deaf and God isn't distant. He hears you in the night, in the pain, in the moments when you think no one's listening. The cry heaven heard from countless hearts before is the same cry he hears from yours now. And maybe, just maybe, what feels like your breaking point is the moment heaven has been waiting for. The moment God begins to turn your cry into a miracle. The invisible hands. There are moments when the divine moves quietly, so quietly that only the heart can sense it. While we wait for thunder, God often works in whispers. His miracles don't always arrive with bright lights or angelic choirs. Sometimes they come disguised as ordinary people, brief encounters, or decisions that seem small at the time but later reveal a purpose too precise to be coincidence. The invisible hands of God are never still. They move through time, through lives, through details we overlook, weaving what we call fate into what he calls fulfillment. When someone is sick, we tend to look at the visible, the doctors, the medicine, the machines. Yet behind those instruments, there's a sacred choreography happening. The right nurse walks into the room at the right moment. A stranger offers a word that keeps the family from losing faith. A specialist suddenly remembers a treatment they almost forgot. None of it feels extraordinary in the moment, but in hindsight, you see the fingerprints of heaven everywhere. God works through hands that don't even know they are being used by him. I once met a doctor who confessed something profound. He said, "Sometimes, I know it wasn't me who saved them. I was there, I did what I could, but something beyond me took control." That's what it means to witness the invisible hands, to be part of something divine without fully understanding it. Even in a sterile room filled with technology, there are angels standing guard, unseen but active. They guide the surgeon's hand, steady the trembling fingers, and whisper peace into fearful hearts. They don't seek recognition, they serve under divine command. The invisible hands are not limited to hospitals. They move in every place where pain meets prayer. In the middle of traffic when an accident is avoided by a fraction of a second. In the financial help that arrives at the exact moment of need. In the person who calls just when loneliness becomes unbearable. You think it's coincidence, but heaven doesn't operate on chance. Every divine touch hides behind what looks ordinary, so that faith can recognize what sight cannot. God rarely announces his presence with spectacle. He prefers subtlety. He hides miracles in moments that feel mundane. Because true faith doesn't need to see, it needs to trust. The invisible hands remind us that God's absence is only an illusion created by our impatience. Even when he seems silent, he's arranging what we've been praying for. What looks like delay is often protection. What feels like distance is preparation. Maybe you've been asking, where is God? Why hasn't he done anything yet? But the truth is, he's already moving. Not always around you, sometimes within you. He's shifting your thoughts, your emotions, your timing. He's aligning hearts and circumstances to prepare you for the very thing you've been begging for. The invisible hands are patient because divine timing requires precision. You might not see anything happening, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Think about the countless miracles that went unnoticed because they came without a spotlight. The surgery that went smoother than predicted. The diagnosis that was wrong after all. The peace that came in the middle of the storm. Every one of these moments is a signature of God. Subtle, personal, deliberate. Heaven doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. In fact, the quietest moves of God often leave the loudest impact on our souls. The invisible hands also reach through people. Friends who pray, family who care, even strangers who show kindness at the right time. God uses them as extensions of his grace. Every hug, every message, every gesture that lifts your spirit is a reminder. You are not forgotten. The creator of the universe still writes details into your story. You may not feel his touch directly, but you can feel the warmth of his love through the people he sends. When you look back on your life, you'll realize how many times those invisible hands held you without your knowing. They stopped accidents, prevented heartbreaks, redirected paths, and opened doors that would have stayed locked without divine intervention. And in every moment you thought you were alone, he was there. Steady, silent, sovereign. So stop waiting to see a sign written in the sky. The signs are already around you. In every breath, every heartbeat, every coincidence too perfect to ignore. The invisible hands of God are never idle. They are shaping your miracle right now, in ways you can't see yet. One day you'll look back and say, "It was Him all along." And in that moment, you'll understand that the unseen is often more real than anything your eyes could ever behold. The time between the diagnosis and the miracle. The hardest part of any miracle is the waiting. That sacred space between the diagnosis and the breakthrough feels endless. It's where faith is tested, hope is stretched, and the human heart learns to wrestle with time. When the doctor delivers the news, the kind that freezes your breath and shatters your plans, your world divides in two. The life you had before and the uncertainty that follows. From that moment on, every second feels heavier. Every prayer feels more urgent, and every sunrise seems to ask the same question: will today be the day? It's in that space, between despair and deliverance, that many people either lose faith or discover it for the first time. Waiting reveals who we really are. It exposes how little control we truly have and how much we rely on what we can see. But miracles don't grow in sight. They grow in silence. They mature in the soil of patience, watered by tears and sustained by trust. God's timing is not a delay, it's precision. What feels like hesitation is often His way of aligning heaven and earth for something greater than we imagined. In that waiting, days can feel cruel. You pray and nothing changes. You hope and the symptoms persist. You believe, yet the evidence doesn't move. It's a battlefield of emotions. Faith colliding with fear, surrender wrestling with doubt. People around you might tell you to stay strong, but they don't hear the quiet conversations you have with God in the middle of the night. Are you listening? Do you still care? Have you forgotten me? These questions aren't signs of weak faith. They are proof that your soul is still reaching out, because only those who believe keep talking to heaven when silence answers back. I've seen people walk through this valley, some healed instantly, others slowly, and a few not in the way they expected. But all of them learned that the waiting itself was holy ground. It was in that in-between where they saw God most clearly. Not in the outcome, but in the endurance. They discovered that peace doesn't come when the miracle arrives. It comes when you stop demanding and start trusting. That's when faith shifts from theory to heartbeat. No longer something you say, but something you live. The time between diagnosis and miracle is a classroom of the soul. It teaches you what no sermon or scripture can teach until you live it. That faith isn't a formula, it's a relationship. God doesn't rush because He's never late. He doesn't panic because He already knows the ending. While you wait, He is working, not only on your situation but on your heart. He's shaping your endurance, strengthening your trust, and teaching you how to rest even while the storm rages. The miracle is not only what happens to you, it's what happens within you. Sometimes, the waiting is the miracle in disguise. Because every day you wake up and still choose to believe, you're witnessing something supernatural, the victory of faith over fear. You may not see the walls fall, but you're marching around them anyway. That persistence, that refusal to let go of hope, is what moves heaven. God counts every tear, hears every whisper, and remembers every act of faith that no one else sees. Nothing is wasted in the waiting. Not one moment, not one breath. Maybe right now you're living in that space, after the diagnosis, before the miracle. You're tired, uncertain, trying to hold on to promises that feel far away. Let me tell you something sacred. God is not testing your patience. He's perfecting your trust. When nothing seems to change, He's changing you. When the answer delays, it's because the story is still being written. Miracles require alignment, not just of circumstances, but of hearts. And sometimes that alignment takes time. Every great testimony once sounded like an unanswered prayer. Every miracle once began with someone saying, "I don't understand." Don't rush the process. The silence you hate today may be the foundation of the miracle you'll thank Him for tomorrow. What you call waiting, heaven calls preparation. And when the moment comes, when the impossible turns possible, you'll realize that the waiting wasn't wasted time. It was the sacred bridge that led you from fear to faith. So hold on, breathe, keep praying even when it feels repetitive, keep believing even when it feels foolish. The time between the diagnosis and the miracle isn't a pause, it's a process. And while you wait, heaven works. One day, what seems distant will make perfect sense, and you'll look back and understand that every delay was divine, every tear had purpose, and every second of waiting was shaping the miracle that was always meant to be yours. The science of the impossible. Science seeks to explain the world through reason, observation, and proof. It measures the measurable and studies the visible. Yet no matter how advanced our understanding becomes, there are still moments that defy every law we know. Moments that remind us that the author of creation is not confined by the pages of his own design. When medicine runs out of answers and science reaches a wall it cannot climb, something divine begins to move. The impossible does not contradict science, it completes it. Because every limit of human knowledge is an open invitation for God to reveal what lies beyond comprehension. Throughout history, the greatest minds have reached this edge and stood in awe. Einstein once admitted that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. Newton, the father of physics, spent more time studying scripture than mathematics. Every true scientist who searches deeply enough eventually finds themselves staring into a vastness that reason alone cannot explain. For what is science if not the discovery of how God chose to organize his creation? And what is faith if not the trust that he can still act outside of it? I've listened to doctors who said, "We did everything right, but something happened we can't explain." Those words are more sacred than they sound. They are a confession, an acknowledgement that there are realms the human mind cannot enter. A heartbeat returns after hours without rhythm. A body declared lifeless stirs again. A scan reveals no trace of what once threatened to kill. It's in these moments that science bears witness to something greater than itself, the intervention of the divine. Heaven doesn't compete with logic, it transcends it. The science of the impossible begins where arrogance ends. It is the meeting point between fact and faith, where both bow before the Creator. Because the deeper we go into understanding the body, the more we see that life itself is a miracle. The DNA that encodes our existence, the heart that beats over 100,000 times a day without our command, the mind that dreams while we sleep. These are mysteries science can describe but never fully explain. Every breath is evidence that we live suspended between physics and grace. There's a quiet humility that comes when science faces what it cannot solve. Some call it anomaly, others coincidence, but the believer calls it a miracle. A doctor's instruments measure recovery, but they cannot measure divine intention. Machines can detect heartbeat and brainwave, but not faith, not prayer, not the invisible current of grace that moves through flesh and spirit. That is why the most extraordinary miracles often happen under the watchful eyes of those trained to document them. Not so they may doubt less, but so that they may see more. God never asks us to abandon science. He asks us to look through it. He designed it as a tool, not a throne. The laws of nature are his handwriting, and when he chooses to rewrite a line, it's not chaos, it's sovereignty. The same God who spoke galaxies into motion is capable of whispering a single word that rearranges molecules, restarts hearts, and restores what was beyond repair. To the mind, it looks impossible. To faith, it looks familiar. Sometimes the miracle isn't that God breaks a law of nature, but that he uses it differently. A medicine suddenly works against all odds. A treatment takes effect in a way no one predicted. A cell regenerates faster than science can explain. These are not interruptions of creation, but demonstrations that the Creator is still present within it. When he acts, he doesn't destroy order. He reveals a higher one. Perhaps the real science of the impossible lies in this truth, that faith and knowledge are not rivals, but partners. Faith gives meaning to what knowledge discovers. Without faith, science becomes cold. Without knowledge, faith becomes blind. Together, they form the full picture of creation, one seen through reason, the other through revelation. And when both meet at their limits, the impossible unfolds. Maybe you've heard doctors say there's no hope left. Maybe they've told you the facts, and the facts are cruel. But remember, facts describe the present. Only God defines the future. The same science that measures the end is often forced to bear witness to new beginnings. Because when the Creator decides to move, even the data must bow. The impossible doesn't break the rules. It reveals the one who made them. The science of the impossible reminds us that we are not alone in the mystery. Every time medicine succeeds, it reflects God's wisdom. Every time it fails, it invites His power. The same hands that built the atom also mend the broken heart. And in the quiet between cause and effect, the supernatural breathes through the natural, turning disbelief into testimony. So, when reason tells you it's over, remember, faith speaks another language. Where logic ends, miracles begin. And the greatest discovery of all is realizing that the God who created the universe is still experimenting with grace, still rewriting outcomes, still performing the science of the impossible in the lives of those who dare to believe. The breath that returned. There is a moment that cannot be described, only felt. The room is still, the machines are silent, and everyone has accepted what they cannot change. The air feels final. And then, without warning, something shifts. A sound breaks the silence. Faint at first, then undeniable. A heartbeat, a breath, a miracle. The very thing that reason had surrendered begins again, as if heaven reached down and pressed restart. The breath that returned is not just oxygen re-entering lungs. It is life itself reminding us that God alone holds the keys to existence. I have seen faces go pale from disbelief, doctors frozen between relief and wonder, families collapsing in tears, whispering, "He's back." They call it resuscitation, spontaneous recovery, medical anomaly, but those who witnessed it know better. Because you can feel when the divine enters a room. The atmosphere thickens, time slows, and a sacred stillness fills the space. What moments earlier was only sorrow becomes holy ground. That's what happens when the author of life decides to rewrite the ending. The return of breath is more than biological, it is spiritual. In Genesis, it says God breathed into man and he became a living soul. Every breath since then has been borrowed from that same divine source. So when life returns where death was declared, it isn't just the body reviving. It's the Creator reasserting His ownership over what He made. It's as if He whispers, "This one still belongs to me." Science can measure heartbeat, oxygen, temperature, but it cannot measure the will of God. And that will is what animates the impossible. There's something indescribably sacred about watching life return. You realize in an instant how fragile existence is, and how powerful grace can be. The first breath after silence isn't just air, it's testimony. It's God saying, "I'm still here." Sometimes the miracle isn't even in the body itself, but in the faith it ignites. People who once doubted now kneel. Those who gave up begin to pray again. Even those who can't explain what they just saw leave with a new reverence for something far beyond science. In every story of a returning breath, there's more than medicine at work. There's divine timing. Because God doesn't act early, and He never acts late. He moves in the exact second when surrender is complete, when there's no room left for pride, no strength left for argument, no faith left except the faint whisper, "Lord, help." That's when heaven exhales, and in that invisible breath, destinies are rewritten. Sometimes the person who comes back doesn't return the same. They speak of light, warmth, peace, not the kind of peace we find in comfort, but the kind that feels eternal. They describe being held, hearing a voice, seeing love itself. Some remember nothing at all, but they live differently afterward, slower, gentler, more aware. Because once you've brushed the edge of eternity, you never see life the same again. And maybe this story is a reflection of something deeper, because we've all experienced a kind of death at some point. The death of hope, of love, of dreams. Times when everything inside felt numb, silent, finished. Yet somehow, life returned. You laughed again, you forgave, you healed. That too was a miracle, the breath that returned to your spirit. Every revival, whether of body or soul, is God breathing into what we thought was gone. So when the world says it's over, don't rush to agree. Remember this, out as long as breath exists, even a single breath, God is present. And even when breath has stopped, His presence does not. He can bring life where there's only memory, motion where there's stillness, joy where there was only grief. He has done it before, and He still does it today. The breath that returned is proof that God is not a story from the past. He's a force in the present. Every breath you take now is a continuation of that same miracle. So breathe deeply. Feel the gift that fills your lungs, because each breath is a reminder that heaven has not finished with you yet. The same God who revived the lifeless can revive your heart, your purpose, your faith. What once was silent will sing again, and one day when your own miracle arrives, in whatever form it takes, you'll understand that the breath that returned was never just about survival. It was about testimony. It was about grace. It was about a God who still breathes life into everything that dares to die. The battle no one saw. Every miracle begins with a battle that few ever witness. Behind every recovery, every answered prayer, every story of hope restored, there's an invisible war, not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and endurance. It's the battle fought in silence, in the hidden places of the heart, where doubt and faith collide. The moment you decide to believe despite what you see, the fight begins. Heaven moves, but so does everything that resists it. The unseen world stirs whenever a soul dares to trust that God is still working. There's a kind of warfare that doesn't make noise, doesn't use weapons, and doesn't leave visible scars. It happens in the waiting rooms, in sleepless nights, in whispered prayers that sound more like sighs. It happens in the mind when fear tries to convince you that hope is useless. It happens when everything you hear says, it's over, but something deep inside refuses to agree. That's the battle no one saw. The war that faith fights when the world has already surrendered. We imagine miracles as sudden bursts of light, but often they're born through quiet endurance. God doesn't only test your strength, He trains your spirit. He lets you walk through the shadows so you can learn that darkness cannot drown a soul anchored in light. You may not see the progress, but every prayer you whisper weakens the enemy. Every moment you choose peace instead of panic, heaven gains ground. Miracles aren't random, they're victories earned in invisible wars. Many people think the hardest part of faith is believing that God can do it. But the real challenge is believing He will. For you, in your situation, even when nothing changes, that's where the real battle happens. Because the enemy doesn't need to take your health or your money. He just needs to take your hope. Once hope is gone, faith starves. And that's why so many give up right before the miracle comes. Not because God stopped working, but because they stopped believing. But what the enemy doesn't understand is that a faithful heart never fights alone. The moment you cry out to heaven, angels are dispatched. You may not see them, but they move through the unseen, carrying strength to your weakness, clarity to your confusion, and courage to your fear. There are prayers that shake the invisible world, not because of their volume, but because of their sincerity. God hears every one of them, and heaven responds. Not always in the way we expect, but always in the way we need. I've spoken with people who described what they felt in the middle of their miracle. An overwhelming sense of peace when everything around them was chaos. A warmth when their body was failing. A whisper in their mind that said, "Don't be afraid." Those weren't coincidences. They were glimpses of the battle being fought on their behalf. Heaven was at war for them, and even though they couldn't see it, they could feel it. That's what divine protection looks like, unseen but undeniable. The battle no one saw also happens inside the human heart. It's the battle between giving up and holding on, between saying God forgot me and saying God is still faithful, between despair and praise. And every time you choose to believe, Not because it's easy, but because you trust Him. You win a victory that echoes through eternity. Because faith isn't pretending everything's fine. It's believing that God is good even when it isn't. You may be in that battle right now. You might not see progress, and you might not feel strong. But remember, your strength was never the source of your victory. God is. Every tear you've cried has been counted. Every sleepless night has been witnessed. And every time you stood your ground when giving up was easier, heaven took note. You've already won more than you think. Sometimes the most powerful miracles come after the fiercest battles. Because what God restores after a storm isn't the same as what was lost. It's better, deeper, stronger. The scars you carry from the unseen war aren't marks of defeat. They're proof of survival. Proof that grace held you when nothing else could. So if you feel like you're fighting alone, don't be fooled by the silence. Heaven is closer than you imagine. The battle no one saw is still being fought, and victory is already written. The light you can't see is still burning. The miracle you've been praying for may already be in motion. And when it finally arrives, you'll understand. The reason you had to fight so hard was because what God was preparing for you was worth every moment of the battle. The shadow of doubt. Every person of faith walks through a season where belief feels fragile. It's that quiet place where you start to question everything you thought you knew about God, prayer, and purpose. The shadow of doubt isn't loud. It creeps in softly, whispering what logic has already concluded. If God could, He would have done it by now. It's the moment when unanswered prayers echo louder than promises, when miracles you've heard about seem reserved for someone else. And yet, paradoxically, this is also the place where faith is purified. Not in certainty, but in the decision to believe while surrounded by questions. Doubt is not the absence of faith. It's the pressure that shapes it. The same way fire purifies gold, uncertainty burns away illusions until what's left is real trust. There are moments when even the strongest believers ask, "Where are you, God?" Moses did. David did. Even Jesus, in his final breath, cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" The presence of doubt doesn't disqualify your faith. It confirms that your faith is alive enough to wrestle with the unseen. The danger isn't in asking questions, it's in letting them silence your hope. When you're caught in that shadow, the world looks dimmer. Prayer feels empty, and worship feels mechanical. You start to measure God's love by your circumstances instead of His character. But God isn't offended by your doubt. He's waiting inside it. He doesn't retreat from your questions. He invites them, because He knows that when faith survives darkness, it becomes unshakable. The same God who allows you to walk through doubt does so not to weaken you, but to deepen your roots. I've met people who came out of the valley of doubt completely changed. They didn't find all the answers, but they found something far better: peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on proof. The kind that whispers, "Even if I never understand, I'll still trust Him." One woman told me she used to think faith meant certainty. Then life fell apart, and she had to learn to believe without evidence, to worship without feeling. She said, "That's when I realized, real faith isn't built on what I see. It's built on who He is." The shadow of doubt tests what kind of believer you are. Are you faithful because of what you receive or because of who you know? Are you praying to get answers, or to remain in relationship with the one who holds them? Faith built on outcomes collapses when results delay. But faith built on love endures even when nothing changes. The shadow forces you to choose, not between belief and unbelief, but between understanding and trust. God often hides behind the veil of silence, not to punish, but to purify. When you can't feel Him, He's teaching you to follow without sight. When your prayers seem unanswered, He's training you to depend on His timing instead of your urgency. He removes the visible so that you might discover the invisible. Every believer who's ever witnessed a miracle has first walked through the shadow, because only those who face doubt truly understand grace. Maybe right now you're standing there, in that half-light where you can't tell whether the dawn is coming or the night is deepening. You've prayed, but the sickness remains. You've hoped, but the answer is delayed. You've worshipped, but you feel alone. Let me tell you, God hasn't gone silent, He's gone deeper. He's not ignoring you, He's preparing you. What you call doubt, He calls development. You think you're losing faith, but you're actually learning to live by it. Even the smallest spark of belief is enough to pierce the thickest shadow. You don't need perfect confidence, you just need a single decision. To trust again today. To wake up and say, I don't see it, but I'll still believe. That's how faith wins its quiet victories, not through strength, but through persistence. And one day, when light breaks through the darkness, you'll understand that your doubt wasn't wasted. It was the soil where deeper faith took root. The shadow of doubt will visit everyone who truly follows God, but it cannot destroy what it was meant to refine. You may walk through it trembling, but you will emerge stronger, clearer, more grounded. Because every believer who keeps walking in the dark eventually discovers the same truth, that faith isn't about avoiding shadows. It's about trusting the light that never leaves, even when you can't see it. The God who writes after the period. Every story has a point where the world thinks it's over. The doctor closes the chart. The judge signs the decision. The relationship ends. The curtain falls. It's the moment marked by a period, the sign of finality. But the God who created language never agreed to stop writing where man decided to end the sentence. He is the author who specializes in continuing stories that others have declared finished. When the world puts a period, God adds a comma. When they say the end, He begins a new chapter. That's the mystery of grace. It doesn't erase the pain of what happened, but it refuses to let it be the final word. There are moments when life feels like a closed book. Everything you built collapses. The prayers you've repeated for years seem unanswered, and you start to believe that maybe this is just how your story ends. But God's pen doesn't run out of ink, and His timing doesn't expire. He keeps writing in the margins of your despair, turning ruins into revelation, endings into entrances. What you call failure, He calls foundation. What you think is loss, He calls preparation. His stories never stop at tragedy. They always pass through it toward transformation. I've spoken with people who've witnessed this divine rewriting, a family who lost everything in a fire, only to find a new purpose in helping others rebuild. A man told he'd never walk again, who now stands every morning with tears in his eyes, not just because he's healed, but because he understands gratitude differently. None of them saw the miracle coming. All of them thought the story was over. But heaven was still holding the pen. God was still writing sentences that began with nevertheless, but then, and suddenly. Because that's how He works, quietly, redemptively, rewriting despair into destiny. You may not see it now, but God has a way of folding pain into purpose. The cross looked like defeat, yet it became the greatest victory in history. The tomb looked like a full stop, yet it was just a pause before resurrection. Every hopeless moment, every silent night, every tear that fell when no one else was watching. None of it is wasted. The author is using them all, constructing a storyline that makes sense only when you see it from eternity's view. If you're still breathing, then the story isn't done. Sometimes God allows us to hit rock bottom because that's the only place sturdy enough for Him to rebuild on. He lets things end so He can begin something purer, deeper, and lasting. You might think He's silent, but He's editing, removing what no longer serves your growth, rewriting characters, refining the plot. The author's silence doesn't mean absence. It means He's still working on the next line. And when it finally arrives, you'll understand why He couldn't let the story end earlier. I know how it feels to think the period means final, to watch everything you hoped for collapse, to lose what you thought you couldn't live without. It's the loneliest place in the world, but it's also sacred, because that's where faith begins to see what eyes cannot. That's where you learn that God doesn't resurrect what was, He resurrects what can be. The same hands that formed you in the beginning are rewriting your tomorrow, one silent miracle at a time. If you're reading your life and it looks like the last page, hold on. God hasn't finished your story. The chapter you're living through might be painful, confusing, or empty, but the plot isn't over. The God who writes after the period has already outlined your redemption. You may not know what it looks like, but He's been weaving it behind every setback, through every detour, across every night you thought would never end. One day, you'll look back and realize that the moments you thought were endings were actually beginnings in disguise. That the no you cried over was making room for a yes that would change everything. That the heartbreak you feared would kill you actually birthed the version of you that could finally live. Because that's what He does. He takes what's broken and uses it as ink. The deeper the wound, the stronger the message. So don't close your book too soon. Don't let despair write your ending. God is still at work, still creating beauty from ashes, still adding commas where life placed periods. What He's preparing will make sense when you turn the page. Trust His authorship. He hasn't lost control of your story. In fact, He's just getting to the part where grace enters and everything changes. The miracle within. There comes a moment when you realize that not every miracle happens on the outside. Some of the greatest ones unfold quietly inside the human soul, invisible to the world yet powerful enough to change everything. The miracle within is the transformation that happens when despair turns into trust, when pain becomes purpose, when fear gives way to peace. It's not seen in a hospital chart or captured on a medical scan. It's felt in the stillness of a heart that decides to believe again. Many people wait for miracles as if they were flashes of light descending from heaven. But the truth is, the most divine work God does is often internal. The healing that happens in the mind before it happens in the body. The forgiveness that frees a soul before it changes a circumstance. The strength that rises in silence before the breakthrough arrives. These are miracles no one applauds, but they are the foundation of all others. Because before God changes what surrounds you, He transforms what's within you. We often ask God to take away our storms, but sometimes He chooses to calm the storm inside us first. When the heart learns peace while the storm still rages, that's a miracle. When a person who once lived in fear learns to rest in faith, that's a miracle. When you forgive someone who never said sorry, or find hope in a situation that logic can't justify, that's heaven moving through your spirit. God doesn't only raise bodies, He resurrects souls. The miracle within doesn't come through comfort. It's born through pressure, through surrender, through the sacred ache of waiting. It's what happens when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now, Lord?" It's the slow, deliberate rebirth of your heart, the moment you begin to see pain not as punishment, but as preparation. God's greatest works are rarely instant. They are formed in process. He uses disappointment to deepen your faith, delay to refine your patience, and silence to sharpen your hearing. I've watched people whose circumstances never changed, but their eyes did. They began to see differently. They still had pain, but they also had peace. They still faced the same battle, but their spirit was unshaken. The miracle wasn't that the situation turned around. It was that they did. That's how God proves His presence. Not always by removing the weight, but by giving you new strength to carry it. The change happens inside first, and from there, everything else begins to shift. Maybe the miracle you need today isn't a cure, a job, or a sign from heaven. Maybe it's something deeper. The ability to breathe again after loss, to smile after heartbreak, to trust after betrayal. Maybe it's the strength to keep going when you don't know what's next. That's the miracle within, the renewal of your soul when nothing external makes sense. It's invisible, but it's real. It's quiet, but it's life-changing. It's not God ignoring your prayers. It's Him answering them in a way that lasts forever. When the heart is transformed, the body follows. When the mind is renewed, the path ahead begins to clear. That's why the Lord works from the inside out. Because real healing starts at the root, not at the surface. And once He's done working inside you, everything around you will begin to align. What looked like chaos will reveal its purpose, and what felt like pain will be remembered as the beginning of a deeper grace. So don't despise the process just because it's invisible. The unseen work is the most powerful of all. God may not have changed your situation yet because He's still changing you. And when He finishes the masterpiece inside your heart, the miracle outside will no longer be just a blessing. It will be confirmation that heaven has already visited you. The miracle within is proof that God's greatest work isn't always what He gives, but what He grows. Peace in the middle of pain, hope in the face of fear, love in the aftermath of loss. That is the kind of miracle that doesn't fade when circumstances shift, the kind that stays with you for life. So listen closely, because even now as you breathe, He's still working. The next heartbeat you feel, the next tear you wipe, the next moment of courage you find, all of them are traces of the miracle already happening within you. When heaven opens, there comes a point in every story of faith when the waiting ends, the darkness lifts, and heaven opens. It doesn't always happen with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes it happens with a single breath of peace that fills the room. Sometimes it's a doctor whispering, "I can't explain it." Sometimes it's the weight in your chest finally lifting after months of prayer. When heaven opens, it's not only about what changes around you, it's about what awakens within you. It's the moment when you realize that everything you went through was leading here, to this intersection of divine mercy and human surrender. When heaven opens, it feels like the air itself shifts. The impossible becomes possible. The broken begins to mend, and the heart that once trembled finds strength it never knew it had. You can't control when it happens or how it arrives. You can only recognize it. That sacred instant when you sense God moving so clearly that doubt can no longer stand. It's the fulfillment of every tear you shed, every prayer you whispered, every night you thought you wouldn't survive. Heaven never opens by accident. It opens by appointment. And when it does, it changes everything. The greatest miracles are not random moments of divine favor. They are answers carefully timed to transform not just situations, but souls. God allows the struggle so that when the breakthrough comes, you recognize His hand. The opening of heaven is not simply about a miracle occurring. It's about revelation, the unveiling of what was always true, that God was with you all along. He never left the hospital room, never ignored the prayer, never forgot the promise. You thought He was silent, but He was working in secret, waiting for the precise moment when your heart was ready to receive. When heaven opens, faith becomes sight. The very thing you feared becomes the ground where grace stands tallest. The silence that once haunted you becomes the evidence of God's preparation. You see how every delay was a setup, every disappointment a redirection, every unanswered prayer a seed that needed time to grow. Nothing was wasted. Heaven opens to reveal that the plan was never broken. It was bigger than your understanding. I've seen people collapse to their knees when heaven opened for them, not because they were shocked, but because they finally understood. They realized that God had been guiding every step, even the painful ones, that He had been orchestrating what felt like chaos into perfect harmony, that the very thing they begged Him to take away was the thing He used to lead them to purpose. When heaven opens, gratitude floods the soul. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Thank you." And maybe heaven's opening for you won't come as a loud miracle, but as a quiet certainty. The knowing in your spirit that you've been seen, loved, and carried through the storm. You'll feel it when you wake up one morning and realize the fear is gone, the bitterness has lifted, the ache has softened. That's heaven too. Not just the spectacular, but the subtle. Because heaven opens in ways that match the language of your soul. When heaven opens, the impossible becomes intimate. The God of the universe steps into your personal story. He turns mourning into meaning, pain into purpose, tragedy into testimony. And when you finally see it, when you realize that all along He was writing redemption through your suffering, you'll understand what every miracle really says, that love never stopped working. So if you're still waiting, don't lose heart. The skies will open, the answer will come. And when it does, you won't just witness a miracle, you'll become one. You'll be living proof that when doctors give up, when logic ends, when the world says it's over, heaven says, "Watch me." Because the God who spoke light into darkness still speaks. The God who raised the dead still breathes life into what we've given up on. And the God who began your story still holds the pen. When heaven opens, everything changes. Not just the circumstance, but the soul that endured it. And in that moment, you'll know beyond doubt that the wait was worth it. Because what God begins, He always completes. So lift your eyes. Heaven is closer than you think. The same God who heard your first prayer is still listening. The same power that raised Jesus still flows through time, still restores, still resurrects. When heaven opens, it doesn't just bless you, it transforms you. And from that moment on, your life becomes its own message, its own testimony to the world. That when doctors give up, when hope seems gone, God still writes miracles that science can't explain.